In this video, I will be discussing motivation and exercise adherence. First, we will look at motivation. Motivation is a drive to fulfill a need, as stated by Gill in 1986. Gill also said that motivation energizes the way we behave and also directs our behavior. The degree to which how the individual feels in that situation determines how much their behavior will go in a certain direction, and whatever action they choose to take is driven by an emotional drive. There are different types of motivation. One is amotivation. This is when an individual has zero motivation for anything and they have no interest in working towards any goals. However, it is a temporary state and can change. The two main types of motivation are intrinsic and extrinsic. Intrinsic motivation is like a drive from within the individual wants to achieve simply because they love the sport, whereas extrinsic motivation comes from a source outside of the individual. For both intrinsic and extrinsic, there are rewards that drive the individual's motivation. For intrinsic motivation, a reward would be things such as a feeling, a sense of achievement, the thrill of a challenge, or the enjoyment of the sport. John clearly has some intrinsic motivation as he continues to swim for the school despite the facilities not being amazing and others trying to be intimidating. But for extrinsic motivation, a reward can be tangible or intangible. Tangible rewards are things you can physically have, so a trophy or a medal, such as John's certificates for his 25 and 50-metre swims, whereas intangible rewards would be things such as praise that come from other people but are not physical. Intrinsic motivation is harder to develop, so there are some strategies that can be used to increase it. One example is to reward effort, and eventually the individual will feel they are good enough and start to praise themselves for their effort. Another strategy is to try and limit comparison. For example, if in a training session the coach should give each individual performer their own feedback so they don't feel they have to be better than or compare themselves to one another. However, extrinsic rewards also need to be used with caution. If they are used too much, the value will be diminished and they won't mean anything to performers. Also, the performers who need extrinsic rewards to keep motivated, if they then fail and do not receive a reward for this can lead to them feeling inadequate. Extrinsic rewards also don't work for everyone. For example, giving out chocolate to younger children at the end of a football match would work, but for older teenage boys this probably wouldn't provide any motivation. Another problem is that individuals becoming overly motivated becomes a big problem, as the constant need to achieve becomes obsessive. A sign of this is somebody overtraining and not having any rest days, or has an injury and they still carry on. It's a form of addiction, as stated by Weinberg and Gold in 2015. They said psychological and physical dependence on exercise, where withdrawal symptoms occur 24 to 36 hours after exercise. In other words, if that person is not exercising, they can become almost depressed. This overmotivation can lead to something known as the burnt out syndrome, meaning they have had a prolonged period of time being exposed to stress, which leads to low self-esteem and emotional exhaustion. Like with most things in sport, there are always factors that affect things, and this is the same with your motivation. Particularly for younger people, family and peers can have a huge impact on your motivation. If you're part of a family where your parents are encouraging, like John's family, of sport, then this should have a positive effect on your motivation, as you would feel it was a good thing to do. But at the same time, if your family are not particularly encouraging in sport, then you would have lower levels of motivation. Another factor is the physical environment. If you don't have the facilities near you to do the sport you want to do, then having the motivation to do it or go to where you need to can take a lot of mental strength and preparation. The actual personality of the person can also have a lot of impact on the individual's motivation levels too. There are 3 theories in psychology used to explain personality, which are trait theory, which states that you are born with all your traits and that is how you will behave in every situation. So they would say in order to be motivated, you would have to have motivation as a trait, and it would have to be innate. The second theory is social learning theory, which says the opposite to trait theory, and that we learn how to behave, so therefore would learn to be motivated. And in sports, this would be through your leader. If your coach was a highly motivated person who encouraged you all the time, this would make you more motivated, which clearly John's PE teacher isn't, because when John began to bunk his swimming lessons, he didn't give him any further encouragement to continue. The interactionist theory incorporates these 2 ideas into one. Leading on from my last point about social learning theory, the leader themselves can be a factor that affects motivation. If they are a good role model who wants to encourage and motivate the performers, then that's a positive thing. But if the coach, like John's PE teacher, doesn't show much interest, then they won't receive much interest back in the form of unmotivated performers. In other words, they have not created a motivational climate to perform in. If they are giving no feedback to their performers, motivation will not increase. The team itself can also create an unmotivational environment if they are not willing to work together or perform to their highest level. It is not always the coach. The physical environment can also affect this. For example, if the weather was bad, that would create low levels of motivation, or if the equipment was poor quality. We will now look at 4 theories used to explain motivation. These are need achievement motivation theory, growth mindset theory, attribution theory, and achievement goal theory. First, we will look at need achievement theory, which bases itself around the idea of the drive or desire to be successful. In this theory, there are 2 types of people, Natch and Naff. Natch is need to achieve, and Naff is need to avoid failure. John is an example of a Naff person, as he failed once and has not gone back to the sport because he feels that if he doesn't, then effectively he can't fail again. Using the example of a penalty in a football match, a Natch person would be up for taking it, and if they did miss it, they would want immediate feedback on what they did wrong so they can achieve better next time, whereas a Naff person would not even take the penalty, they would avoid it at all costs. Natch people can often be the people who aren't actually amazing at performing, so they have a low probability of success, but they want to achieve, so they try their hardest, as you can see here, point A on the graph. This means they have a high incentive value of success, whereas Naff people often have a higher probability of success, but their incentive for success is low, meaning they feel they have nothing to work for, so they just sit back, which is B on the graph. For Naff people, it is possible to develop Natch mindset through some simple tasks such as giving positive feedback, encouraging risk-taking, setting the goals or smart targets, and gradually increasing the task difficulty to make them work harder for it. The next theory we will look at is growth mindset theory. This was developed by Dweck in 2008. Dweck stated that people with growth mindset believe that they can develop their abilities through dedication and hard work. Having this sort of mindset creates a motivated person as they want to work harder and achieve bigger things. They are much more willing to learn and have high levels of resilience, which are key things needed in order to actually succeed. However, people who do not have a growth mindset have fixed mindsets. These people don't feel they need to work harder or improve everything. Everything they can already do is at the ability they can do it at. They believe that everyone has talents and this is what they are good at and nothing else can be improved. In other words, they think all their success will come from things they are already good at. For people with growth mindset, it is much easier for them to come back from failure, unlike fixed mindsets. John may have a fixed mindset, as after seeing his time so slow from swimming, he never returned to it because he sees himself as now not having swimming as a talent. The penultimate theory is attribution theory, which was developed by Weiner in 1982, and it looks at the perceived reason for a result, in other words, why you succeed or fail, and then the future effect of this on your performance. He developed a grid to try and explain this. When high achievers have success, they will praise themselves and say it's down to their own ability and effort, so internal factors. And when they fail, they will blame it on their luck and their difficulty, so external factors. By doing this, it keeps them more positive in their mindset, as they aren't beating themselves up about the fact that they have failed. However, low achievers are different. When they have success, they put it down to the difficulty and luck, for example, saying it was easy instead of praising themselves. And when they have defeat, they blame it totally on their ability and effort, not anything else. They need to use the strategies the high achievers do, known as self-serving bias, which means the use of attributions to protect their self-esteem and confidence. Low achievers often have learned helplessness, which means they see failure as inevitable and they have no control over it, which then leads to them blaming the failure on their own ability and effort, not any other circumstances. There are 3 types of learned helplessness. General learned helplessness, which means, for example, John would have said he was good at swimming but bad at football. The second type is specific learned helplessness. So John, for example, may be great at swimming but struggles with backstroke. And the final learned helplessness is global, which would be someone saying they were rubbish at all sports. We will now look at the final theory, achievement goal theory, developed by Duda and Hall in 2001. It focuses on the idea that individuals develop competence-based goals in an evaluative setting. In this case, the evaluative setting is sport. There are 2 different types of goals, ego goal orientated or task goal orientation. Ego goals are based around the idea of comparing yourself to others and wanting to beat them during competition. These sorts of people are likely to drop out when failing or reduce their efforts, and they are also more likely to develop anxiety in competition. John shows some characteristics of an ego goal individual, as when he failed he did not return back to his swimming, despite the fact he had friends with similar grades to him who did carry on. His friends are more task goal orientated. They compare themselves to themselves and they wish to improve their performance for themselves and to learn and master new skills. John's friends would be likely to now try and work even harder despite the fact they are failing. They will believe that with hard work they will achieve success. Duda stated that task orientation will lead to higher levels of motivation, but individuals who partake in sport need a balance of both task and ego orientation. They need task orientation so they don't give up when they fail, but they also need all ego orientation. So, for example, for John, he could look at someone who is faster than him and set a goal to train to be as fast as that person. Like with most things in sport, there can be influences on achievement motivation. Significant others can have an effect. John's family has been very encouraging for him the whole time because they do not want him to become overweight like them. But for John, that could be a problem because if he sees his family being undermotivated, then that could lead to him not feeling like he has to try. The social environment can also have an effect. It says that John was surrounded by domineering boys, which could lead to him feeling inadequate, therefore decreasing his motivation. And his PE teacher also clearly doesn't have much thought for the fact that the boys who didn't do as well may not want their scores and times being put up for everyone to look at. Going back to the motivational climate, if the climate of his PE class is clearly ego-orientated, as the teacher feels the need to compare all the boys' times, and there are lots of races, therefore making them more ego-task-orientated as it becomes about beating one another. We will now look at exercise adherence. There are many reasons as to why people choose to exercise and why people choose not to. Some of the benefits to exercise are for health, social, career, confidence, and ability. Health is a personal benefit to doing exercise, as by exercising it increases your fitness and general everyday health and helps to avoid things such as heart disease and becoming overweight, which are both concerns for John's parents since he stopped swimming. People often join a sporting club for the social side as they find it easier to exercise when with other people as it encourages them more, therefore making them more motivated. This is a personal factor but also an environmental factor as it depends whether people have a club to join near them. Career is obvious if someone is good enough, which also links with ability. If somebody is good at something, they will often take it up as a hobby and sometimes take it to the next level of making a career out of it. Making a career is a personal and activity-based factor, and ability is an activity-based factor. Doing exercise can also make people more confident and help them improve their appearance to them, by, for example, helping them lose weight or not gain weight, which is a factor John's parents are worried about with him now after his GCSE experience. He has lost confidence. This is a personal factor. Leading on from my last point, confidence can also be a barrier to exercising, which it is for John since he feels like he is inadequate in his PE swimming lessons. Injury can also be another personal factor that stops people from being able to exercise, as if they physically cannot do it, then it will not happen. Disability is another reason why some people cannot do exercise. This leads into the environment and location, because if for a disabled person there are no facilities near them that they can use, they cannot exercise. This also affects able people if they live in an isolated area without facilities near enough to them, then this is another environmental barrier. The final barrier to exercise is money. If somebody can get the funds needed to do the sport they want to do, this will create no sense of motivation, which is another personal factor. Personal environment and task-related factors are all determinants of exercise adherence. Personal factors linked to things such as income, motivation, and personality of the individual, whereas environmental links to more social aspects and physical aspects such as facilities. Finally, task-related factors linked to the ability of the performers themselves.